Welcome, my name is Jon Kelly. On June 25th, 2021, the Pentagon released its long-awaited UFO report. This submission was in response to a 2020 congressional spending package stipulation requiring the U.S. Department of Defense and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to deliver an unclassified brief concerning what the U.S. government knows about UFOs to the Congress. At 9 pages, the report is said to represent the most direct and substantive U.S. government account of its kind ever made public. Our guest today is Dr. Robert Wenzel Gross. Dr. Gross is a semi-retired U.S. educator who taught in public schools for more than 23 years and served as a school administrator for 17 years. He earned his Doctor of Education from Penn State University, where he also taught music and music appreciation. Dr. Gross is currently working on a book titled No Time Like the Present to Reform Ufology, and has released a new UFO white paper report titled Relevant and Reliable Evidence Shows the Cornerstone of Ufology was a program developed by United States entities. In our previous interview, Dr. Gross called for the disbanding of all UFO groups, citing widespread pseudoscience in the wake of Mutual UFO Network Executive Director Jan Harzan's July 3rd, 2020 arrest. Dr. Gross, it's always great to speak to you. Thank you for joining us again.
Same here, John. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's been quite a year. The hype surrounding the Pentagon's UAP report, the lead up to the various groups jousting for position in the wake of anticipated new disclosures. Of course, it was Congress who saw the unredacted portions. The public's on 9 pages. What are your thoughts about what has been released and what the Pentagon is doing?
Well, John, to me, it's very exciting times. In fact, there are so many things happening. I'm still digesting it all and trying to put it together. But I see some very unique things happening, especially with the research that I've been doing. And I see some things that are concerning me about the future of studying UAPs/UFOs, because I think they do deserve to be studied. And I'm seeing some red flags flying already.
All right. Well, you are our science insider. You are an insider in closed-door meetings at MUFON. Insider now. Today, we're hoping you'll tell us more about what's happening at the Scientific Coalition for the Study of UAPs, or what we know as UFOs. You are a scientific insider watching these historic processes take place. I mean, there was a lot of hype about disclosure, about potential extraterrestrial disclosure leading up to the June report from the Pentagon. When you read those 9 pages, what do you see the government is telling us?
Well, I think it was a very worthwhile report, because they're telling us exactly what we need to know for right now. And of course, that was the report that was not classified. So the classified report is still out there, and some people have seen that report. But I'm just seeing some things that are starting to bubble up now, because the report, the 9-page report, was released. And things I didn't think I'd see are happening. And unfortunately, I essentially predicted some of the things that did happen. And I plan to go into some detail on those with you, because I think they're extremely important for you and your followers to know.
Well, again, you are our insider. I couldn't hack the math, so no one invited me to all these meetings. You have some direct insight. I think it's really interesting. We've been talking over the past week since the UAP report was released. And some of the concerns you've mentioned, some of the activities, or maybe some of the seeming behavior within places like the Scientific Coalition, some of these concerns are coming to mind now. If this is a historic turning point, as it's been raised to be, what should our concerns be now, looking forwards, from your point of view?
Well, and again, this is from my point of view. My major concern is that as long as these let's call them UAP, UFO research organizations can manipulate data or information about UFOs. and have control over that, we'll never know the truth about the UFO phenomenon. That's my distinct impression right now, after I've seen everything in just the last few days, that as long as they have some way of shaping or having input on the data that's coming out from scientists and researchers, I don't think, again, this is my personal opinion, I don't think we'll ever know what's really going on with that whole phenomenon.
Well, it sounds like you're talking about some sort of distortion or even some form of corruption that's interfering with the process.
I think it has the potential to introduce some type of bias into the whole process, in which science, it has to be, objective and unbiased. And I can see where there's some people trying to make room for tempering what the research data is showing. Now, I don't feel good about it at all.
Well, tell us more. You have a thorough background in establishment science, in mainstream science, and preparing reports, experiments, etc. How is this so different from what the conduct you're familiar with in mainstream science?
Well, for example, in the whole concept of, let's call it the UFO community or UFO enthusiasts, there are certain levels of believers, let's call them the non-believers. And if you don't mind, a little bit later I'll get into distinguishing those. But my concern is that believers, and they do exist out there, but believers in intelligent extraterrestrial life, that they may end up being used as a cudgel by organizations such as SCU or MUFON, as well as other nonprofit organizations. And they may serve as a cudgel by being influential partners in future UAP and UFO research releases.
Now, you were talking about the UFO organizations will use their audiences against or to create pressure on politicians. Is that what we're talking about?
I think that, as well as to somehow help sway the results of research so that they are not totally objective or unbiased any longer. Well, that's my gut feeling.
So science, which is ostensibly all about objectivity, all about removing personal perspectives, trying to find absolute answers. I'm understanding what you're saying. It's the science is coming out of ufology. It's more like the product of an old boys club or some kind of institution that has secondary or tertiary agendas, not just disclosure agendas. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Well, tell us
my
more.
Fear.
Tell us more about these concerns.
Okay, here goes. Well, first of all, and again, I'm trying to give just your followers a bit of an introduction, just so they can see where I'm coming from. But for example, the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies, or SCU, it's a 501c3 charitable organization, and it's allegedly a think tank of scientists and researchers exploring the unidentified aerial phenomena area, let's say. And at the same time, you've got the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, and it's a U.S.-based nonprofit organization composed of both civilian volunteers, of mostly civilian volunteers, who study reported UFO sightings. Now, some UAP/UFO, and I hate to use that terminology like that, but that's how it's coming out lately. But some UAP UFO enthusiasts believe that the truth is somewhere out there, okay? However, the odds right now seem to be against the United States government knowing what was going on and revealing it. And they're trying to have some influence on revealing the research down the road. And I don't think we're going to get objective answers as to what's going on down there. Many members of the UFO community believe that aliens from other worlds are not a threat, but that the government, our government, or governments are a threat because of the untruths that are coming out there.
Well, this narrative was pronounced in the Billy Meyer works that I was exposed to, the Wendell Stevens books from the 1970s, stating that if the major powers during the Cold War were to get their hand on flying saucer technology, their first priority would be use it to achieve world domination. That was the mythos, or the folklore emerging. And so I can see that as a very influential message. Peace-loving people might be afraid that their own government wanted to weaponize this.
And even when you go back to 1947, the whole concept of the Cold War era and wars being over, people didn't know what to expect because anything could have happened, and there were a lot of experiments going on with nuclear weapons and different kinds of balloons and so forth. Anyways,
in the atomic age, anything was possible.
Yes, and people were, they were jumping to conclusions before they even thought things through, and people who were not what I would consider, they weren't real scientists, they were more pseudoscientists, were getting a platform somehow, and their information was being released out there, but it wasn't quality information.
Now, in your career, you spent time in New Mexico.
Yes, about 10 years.
Considerable time in New Mexico, the site of the infamous Roswell UFO crash narrative.
Yes.
But your white paper takes us in a different direction from what the public has been exposed to through preponderance of media and film and radio talk shows, telling us one way of looking at the Roswell question. But I think you've, through your research, have raised some very important points. And this is part of this contributes to our feeling of controversy and a disturbance in the force in the ufology community.
Yes, it raised some points, but also raised some eyebrows, especially the people that made a living off of the Roswell case.
Well, many people have anchored their reputations to this case. Fact or fantasy, their names are tied deeply. Stanton Friedman, one author who's well known as a Roswell advocate. Yes,
and it's just amazing what I've run into. Myself, because I try to be as objective as possible and as unbiased as possible, and use science as much as possible, and use primary resources for my research. Because, like when I did my doctorate, I did a research study, and my research study won awards at Penn State because of the quality of the research. And I was working on classified research projects at Penn State back in the 1980s, some very interesting projects. So I knew what to do and how to handle information.
Specifically, you're telling us that you've worked with secured intelligence in your scientific endeavors in the academic world. You were called upon to handle classified information at that time.
Yes. Now, not only in just research, but also I was a peer reviewer for large grants and so forth, and I had to be careful how I handle even that material. I had to keep it in a certain room with a certain lock, and I had to destroy it in certain ways once I was done with that information. So I went through a lot of that.
We can expect that you have met the minimum competency required to deal with and discuss security topics.
Yes, in fact, I'm still involved with the government. I'm still kind of in a pool of individuals that work for the government, and I have to make a statement every so often that a non-disclosure agreement and agreed I'm not doing certain things.
Very good. And so you're a person, you're still in demand. Your skills in these areas are still in demand, and this is the federal government that we're talking about.
Yes, usually, yes.
So with this background in mind, you're looking at the popular questions in the UFO field, Roswell being possibly the Rosetta Stone to some people of UFOs.
Yes.
Well, tell us more on your take. What did you discover through your hard initiative?
On Roswell?
Yes.
Oh, okay. This caused a lot of controversy. I'm going to kind of wing it here, but I was doing research on Roswell because it interested me. And in fact, one day, I think it was in the 1980s, 82, I was working in the library at Penn State in what they call the stacks. And one day I turned around and the book, The Roswell Incident, was right across from me. And I was supposed to be doing research on music education. And I grabbed the book and sat down at a table, read almost the whole book. And I was supposed to be doing research on something totally different. So it got my interest. But to make a long story short, what had happened is I'm a very aggressive researcher. And I knew what was going on from talking to people in Roswell, because I was up there. I served on a New Mexico gang task force that met in Roswell, New Mexico for training sessions. So when I was up there for the training sessions, I would also talk to the people in the community. And also, I've been to the Roswell Festival a couple of times. And, so while I'm up there, I don't just go to the festival, I talk to people. And I was up in that area for like 10 years. So I got to talk to a lot of different people who knew firsthand about the original 1947 Roswell case. But again, excuse me. To make a long story short, around 2018, I ran across some, it was a research done and released by the government that indicated definitely that there were experiments going on with high-altitude balloons that were being launched out of Alamogordo, New Mexico. And this was starting in January 1st, I think, around 1947, up through at least July 7th of 1947, where they were experimenting with different materials for the balloons, as well as coatings for the balloons, because the New Mexico sun was deteriorating the balloons. So there was a man's name. They listed his name, and he had been working with. He was the first one to use polyethylene material for the balloon itself, and that they were coating the balloons with aluminum, basically to protect them. And there were a lot of experiments going on with those metallized balloons. It was part of Project Mogul. They were high altitude, constant level balloons. So those balloons were going on. At the same time, there were experiments going on in a ranch in Roswell from Dr. Goddard. Even though he had died in 1945, members of his team were still up in the Roswell area, and they were working on using the V-2 rockets, I think they were, that they captured from Germany, and they redid them, I believe. And they were eventually going to be using those V-2 rockets to launch what would eventually be passive communications satellites into space. And those satellites they were working on using those rockets to launch the satellites, and they had to figure out ways to fold up these. Again, they were polyethylene balloons, essentially, that were coated with aluminum. And so that project was going on at the same time. And so in general, they were working towards inventing what we have today as Mylar. So there were a lot of experiments that involved balloons, polyethylene-coated Mylar, and that's exactly what was found on the Roswell Ranch. And there were incidents where they were experimenting with these high-altitude balloons where they did not have a record of when those balloons were launched, but there was definitely a record that by May of 1948, the government was regularly launching polyethylene balloons that were coated with aluminum from Alamogordo. So those balloons didn't just appear overnight. They had been experimenting with those kind of balloons over the years. And they're right in the one, I think there were 3 reports that I found. In the one report, it stated, yes, what people said was a UFO that landed in Roswell was actually from one of our balloons.
So this is an unambiguous paper trail. This isn't some cryptic path. You were just able, as a professional researcher, to go straight to the sources and determine that this was going on at the same time.
Yes, and these were government reports that were released, I think, 1995, 1997. I think there was another one, but there were a lot of, let's say, worthy scientific reports that described what actually was found at Roswell. Now, no one ever saw the balloon or the flying disc or whatever they want to call it, but they found the results. And another interesting thing, I think it was 1959 on the East Coast when they were experimenting with the early forerunners of the Echo balloons. Do you remember the Echo satellites, those huge, they were, again, polyethylene metallized balloons. They were experimenting with launching one of those balloons, and it blew up. And the same kind of materials that were found at Roswell were released and reported on the East Coast. And that was 1959, I think it was.
So what you discovered, as you said, that the insiders in these experiments themselves reflected how the public had misinterpreted their materials as space junk from aliens. But nonetheless, these conclusions themselves that you reached from your, sounds like a very straightforward study, this finding became the source of controversy of its own. Is that correct?
Yes, for me, yes, it did. But and even in the reports I found, there were members of NASA saying that they were too embarrassed that their balloon blew up. They didn't even claim that it was their balloon. And it had the same kind of material, the shards of metal, that people reported all over the East Coast seeing them. But nobody that I can recall anyways, no one from NASA owned up that it was their balloon because they didn't want to be embarrassed that it exploded.
Well, and so this is an important point. Maybe some people will think this is a very simple and obvious point, but the stigma surrounding misbehaved experiments and stuff could be enough to invoke different kinds of informal secrecy, let alone state secrecy. Oh.
Yeah, because when I lived in New Mexico, and New Mexico has a cowboy-like culture, because like I said, Dr. Goddard was launching rockets. And he was back before the Germans were experimenting with the V2 rocket and so forth. They were back and forth communicating on how the rockets would work. Then they were figuring out how to use those rockets to launch passive communication satellites. So there were government projects that were overlapping each other, and that was causing some confusion as well because they weren't necessarily in silos, even though they thought they were.
The development wasn't entirely in secret, and so in some ways it may have been difficult for the public at that time who weren't part of those programs to access that information or to be aware or knowledgeable about secret projects. Because
the reports didn't come out officially until much later, but at that time there were a few people that were in the know exactly as what was going on. But they should have known that, New Mexico, there's all kinds of aerospace studies going on out there. It's because of the, the white sands and everyone else, they're up there, all in that place.
So as you say, this was a period in that time before these technologies became much more established. It was much closer to amateur science and innovation. The community themselves, with Goddard and others, was out there in the field with their rockets on weekends or on weeknights. So, as you say, anyone who was familiar with the terrain, who knew the culture there, could have made sense that this was a hotbed of do-it-yourself experimentation. That the possibility of finding some sort of what would appear to be high-tech materials materials at the time, or experimental materials at the time, it was quite a high probability that one might find those things in New Mexico.
Exactly. And, I remember going out, I used to hike a lot when I was in New Mexico, and I remember going out hiking in the middle of nowhere and finding parts of rockets that were up in, deserted land, and, and they would, I was doing a lot of research on it because I loved the research, but they would have these, they were like metal-coated gondolas even that looked like, they were like spheres that they would put things in and then launch and then check, do experiments with them. But they used to put signs on, please return to, Alamogordo Air Force Base or whatever. But they got to the point where they were losing so many of them, then they didn't know where they went down, that they just left them out there.
So to my limited way of thinking, places like New Mexico, Arizona, you'd expect maybe those would be the graveyards of the wagon trails, the ones that didn't make it. We'd see the leftovers from 19th century travel. But now in the space age, it's also the graveyard for rocket parts in a sense.
Sure. And there were a lot of places like that. But New Mexico was probably the most prevalent, so nothing would surprise me. I mean, they were doing experiments also with primates, putting monkeys into satellites and so forth, and they were doing experiments that people never even knew about back in those days.
So again, the proclivity of science to test stuff was visible in full force in this time.
And these guys, I knew some of the scientists that worked out in New Mexico in some of the labs, and because usually after a while that they kind of were not as stable as they used to be, and I used to hang out with those guys, but they were telling me stories about stuff that it was normal for them to experiment with, but for us, we would just jump to some conclusion, and it was fine for I would say the authorities, let's call them, to let people think that they were from another planet, so then they wouldn't, and people would believe it, because, there's about probably a third of the people in the United States, at least, believe that we're being visited by UFOs, so then that would just take care of any kind of cover-up that they needed.
So you're telling me that on the one hand, we had these somewhat rational, logical, scientific community with insider knowledge about some of the anomalies that were happening in the early 20th century. They knew it was because of their experiments,
right?
And then we have a population whose life is happening outside of that research, and they have a tendency to be strong members of faith communities. They lens the world through faith.
Yeah, well, it's. I don't know if I would go as far as faith, but they would be more believers in something than bother to look at the scientific end of it. I think it was easier to believe that something like that was happening than really do the homework to find out what was really going on in those places.
Well, we live in a society, our society has become one of experts because the average person cannot be competent in all the different fields of endeavor that we are engaged in now. So we trust our experts or depend on our experts. The lay people depend on the experts' position. It seems, with my limited understanding so far in our conversation, that in some ways, due to a lack of interest on the part of the science community, maybe to explain more, you were saying that it served the science community's interest that the public believed in aliens being the cause of different findings. It served their interests because they didn't really want to get involved with explaining what they were doing to the public.
Yeah, I would say that that's quite accurate. That way, they could convince some of the people who were witnessing these experiments that they were something else that couldn't be explained, and then they could kind of write that off as that'll keep those people busy for a while, thinking about that.
So this was in response to questions of project security, because yes. I'm assuming that they were bound to secure their projects. They couldn't have leaks and classified information going out.
And a lot of the people didn't even know that they were working on top secret projects. That's, I mean, like with the balloons, there was I'm trying to think, it was the Watson Laboratories and NYU that joined together to create these high altitude balloons. And those balloons were part of what eventually became known as Project Mogul. But some of the people that were working on Project Mogul didn't know that they were working on Project Mogul. Because like there were two separate teams in the Alamogordo launches, and one were from New York University, and one was from the Watson Laboratories. And I think I'm getting my names correct, but some of those flights were launched with, saying exactly what kind of balloons and everything and what they expected. And then there were these service balloons that they worked on, which were they didn't have any record of what was going on with that balloon. And that's when the experiments were going on. Because part of the agreement that, I think it was 1946, that New York University, NYU, and Watson Labs agreed to was that one thing that the new balloons had to do was be tracked somehow by radar or another device. And they all had like radar targets that were attached to the balloons, or in my case, I believe that they had some of the balloons that were metallized. That way they'd be easier to track and they wouldn't have to use the radar targets on the balloons themselves, because they were using not just balloons necessarily, but whole balloon trains. And it's amazing when you start, like, I was doing research for SCU on one project, and I was also publishing my research on Roswell on the SCU Facebook page, and that got me into a bit of trouble. But the idea was, when I was looking at one of the projects I was working on was actually taking a look at all of as many as possible of the UFO reports that started back with, it was either in 1946 or 1947. And once, you realized that these balloons were being launched out of Alamogordo around that time, and that polyethylene does strange things in the light, that you were seeing those what the people were reporting as UFOs and the spheres were actually those balloons, and the people launching those balloons were kind of like laughing, saying, "Yeah, that was our balloons, but we'll let you think that they were UFOs."
Well, and so the SCU, as I understand it, is supposed to have some kind of a peer review process and data sharing where affiliates such as yourselves can post papers and receive professional feedback. How has that been going? How was this document received by your peers?
You really want to know?
I think it's important that we find out.
Well, I was trying not to look at my notes, but luckily I did document everything. But yeah, I was accepted into that SCU group. I had to be nominated and accepted, and I think that was in March of 2018, if I'm not mistaken here. But because in February of 2018, I did a presentation at the International UFO Congress, and it went pretty well, and that was about the Kecksburg incident. So that's when they were, at the International UFO Congress, they were talking about this new group, SCU, and they were saying how, if you wanted to join, that I'd have to be nominated and accepted into the group. And back that time, I think there was only about 40 members. So in all honesty, they were just getting this off the ground. And the fact that I had a doctorate, and most of them had, bachelor's degrees, they were looking forward for me to joining the team, any kind of team that they put together. So then it was March 19th of 2018 that I was finally accepted into the SCU group, because it sounded like a pretty neat thing to go on. These guys were supposedly a worldwide think tank about the UAP UFO phenomenon. And so I had been working on this research about Roswell. At the same time, I was working on the research about Kecksburg. And I knew I had some quality information. And so, let's see, let me try to think what happened. I was asked to join, this was in, I think, June of 2018, a team. And I have screenshots of all the information, but I was asked to join a team that was basically, and I don't have all the words right now in front of me, but it was a shape identification team. There were only going to be 3 of us on the team. And it was going to be Robert Powell, and it was myself, and what was his other name? Larry Hancock. I don't know if those names are familiar to you, but the 3 of us were to be a team to work on this project. And Robert Powell recruited me to work on this project, and it was only going to be a 3-member team. So I took this team as being like a type of a task force, because that's all we were going to work on is shape identification. And there were a lot of things. I mean, I could read you the whole description of what Robert sent me, but it was going to be a lot of work, and we were going to take a look at shapes of UFOs that have been reported and basically talk about those shapes. And it went back, I think, to 1946 or 1947. And we started working on that. And I remember that we would have phone calls, like, conference calls, and then we would communicate over emails back and forth. So I have all the emails. And Robert told me that this new team, he reported as a team that I would be part of, and there would only be 3 of us, that the team was modeled after, I think he would call it Project 14, which was a United States Air Force project. And he quoted it, and then there was also, if I can find, okay, so he said that this shape identification project was based on a U.S. Air Force Report 14, it was called. And he also said that there was a book that a man by the name of Paul Hill had put together about the same type of a project. And Paul Hill was a NASA engineer. So in my opinion, we were doing this project as based on those 2 reports. Those 2 projects. And it was a lot of work. And I worked on it from June of 2018 to July of 2018. But what happened is, and again, we were in communication on this team, this shape identification team. There were just 3 of us. We would communicate by email regularly, maybe a couple of times a day sometimes, and then we would have a conference call. Well, in the meantime, I published my report on Roswell onto the SCU affiliates. There was we had a private Facebook page that we were supposed to encourage to put our research on that page so other people could critique it. And I was used to doing that, because at Penn State, whenever I do a project and it got acclaim, I'd go around to other universities and present like what were called poster papers. And then everybody would try to cut down my research if they could. That's how you got better at it. So I was used to critique. But what had happened is, so I put my Roswell work out there on thinking the SCU team was ready for this. So, but at the same time that I put that out there on the SCU private website, I got a call from Martin Willis. He had heard that I was doing research and found an alternative solution to Roswell. And I went on his show, and I gave most of my presentation about what I found. I didn't want to release the whole thing about Roswell because I was writing a book on it at the time. And so I went on his show and talked about what I found, and I talked about the information that was out there, and I talked about the evidence that I had. Well, there was another member of this SCU coalition. His name was Kevin Randall. And Kevin basically made a living on the Roswell incident. And when I think he heard even though I had been in contact with him, I wanted to hear about what he had to say about Roswell, he had never responded to me. Okay, so all of a sudden, I guess he saw the Willis report, the Willis video, and he went to his own private blog, I guess you would call it, and he started writing, statements about my research as well as false statements about me. So I went to the members of the Scientific Coalition for UFOlogy Studies, or whatever it was called, and I said, wait a minute, coalition members shouldn't be doing this. I went to the board, and I said, coalition means you're all going in the same direction for the same thing. And I said, I thought that's what we were doing. That's why I joined the group. And I said, you can't have coalition members, hiding in bushes throwing stones at the other coalition members, especially when you're asking them to post their research on your webpage. And anyhow, that didn't end real well for me. So that, eventually Kevin was professional enough that he did remove some of the statements that he had made in writing on his blog. So I didn't have to sue him or anything like that. But I lost all respect, because then I was told by what's his name, William. I can't think of his name right now. But he was I think a board member of that group. I think it starts with an H, but anyhow.
Rich Hoffman.
Yes, that's it. Rich Hoffman informed me that that Kevin Randall did not communicate on Facebook, and that I was not permitted to communicate with him on Facebook, and he gave me Kevin's personal email address, and I said, wait a minute. I said, I'm not going to contact him unless he gives me his personal email address. I said, that's only professional. And then later on, I found that Rich Hoffman and Kevin Randall were communicating together on the SCU Facebook page. And after Hoffman told me that Kevin Randall doesn't communicate on that. And so then I said, what are you doing here? I made it a point. And at that point, I was blocked from SCU, and I wasn't given any kind of warning, and they also stopped communicating with me on the shape identification project.
Well, now, to clarify, when you were brought into SCU, there was a formal process?
You mean I don't think so.
When you joined or became an affiliate, was there any paperwork, or was it just a pronouncement? There was no formal agreement?
Not a formal agreement, other than, we were supposed to put we were encouraged to put our research up there, and nobody said that you would, your career would be ruined if you did it.
I hear you. And so further to this then, as far as we know, are you still an SCU affiliate or no?
No, I checked lately, and my name's not on the spreadsheet anymore.
So your name was dropped internally, but there was no process whereby they informed you of their decision?
No, they just let me wandering around out there for a while. But I recall I never got any official notice. But, I was... No. Here, I found an email that I got from Richard Hoffman on July 7th, 2018.
Mm-hmm.
This is after this all happened, because the first time I ever communicated, I think, with Kevin Randall was July 4th, 2018. Mm-hmm. But Richard Hoffman sent me the following Facebook post, and I have a screenshot of it. He said, "To clarify for the benefit of all, there is not requirement of SCU to have a Facebook account. We created this page as a means of communicating with our affiliates and overall collaboration. I personally respect you both," meaning me and Kevin, "and hope that you can resolve this amicably and perhaps offline. Thanks." And then it wasn't long after that when, after Rich Hoffman told me that Randall doesn't communicate, on Facebook, then he was communicating with him on Facebook, and I called him on. I said, "Wait a minute, you just told me that Randall doesn't communicate." And then it was right after that meeting that I was blocked.
Strangely to me, it sounds like there was some sort of alternate agenda guiding the decisions on behalf of the other parties from the way I hear you describing it. It's like a strange example of gaslighting, setting one up in some sort of good faith endeavor, and then behind the scenes, as soon as you call people on what looked like unprofessional conduct, it becomes a grounds for pariahship.
And in fact, I didn't even know that Kevin Randall had a blog or was writing about me on the blog, but other members of SCU were emailing me and sending me Facebook messages and so forth saying, "Hey, you ought to see what he's writing about you on his blog." That's how I found out about it. So other people from SCU were reporting that to me. And, and I just said it was totally unprofessional that they do that. And I said, this is not a professional organization, in my opinion, at all. And now, today they're asking for people to, become part of that organization because they need money, so they want to have an input on what the releases are about the UAP UFO phenomenon from the government.
From what I'm hearing you say, it sounds though as if there's this secret that group functions based on a secret back channel of communications, and they're presenting that their mission, et cetera, is one thing, but functionally, you were able to determine that there's a communications back channel that's actually driving or guiding decision-making processes in that group. It's almost as if by calling Kevin Randall on calling him to account on what he wrote, that you broke some kind of unwritten rule. You said the thing that could never be said. The forbidden thing. You said the thing, and that somehow has spooked these scientific-minded people. The superstition surrounding what you have done seems to have, the taboo around what you have done seems to have colored their perspectives in terms of dealing with you.
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with cronyism. I think Kevin Randall did the right thing. I had, and as a result, I've lost respect for that organization, because of the way they handled, my situation, and also, there were other things that just weren't professional at all. I couldn't continue, in my mind, I couldn't continue to be a professional researcher and still be a member of that group, knowing what went on.
Well, it seems MUFON and SCU both we could say both overpromised and underdelivered.
Oh, in my opinion, yeah, definitely. Because if you go right now, if you go to the SCU website, you're still going to find misspelled words on their Facebook or on their website, not necessarily on their Facebook page, but misspelled words and the wrong form of the word, like maybe IT''S when it should have been ITS or something like that. You're still going to be, you're seeing those mistakes out there in the public, which to me, like at Penn State, they would really ridicule your work. I mean, you had to put it out there, and they would go through it with a fine-tooth comb. If you inverted an I and an E in somebody's last name, your whole career was down the tubes.
So you say bad sloppiness
Oh, yeah.
Has been a red flag in the academic world for a long time, it would seem.
Yes, but there is, there's potential for a group like SCU, but you can't do the kind of things that, were allowed. And actually, I have, again, Facebook screenshots where people thought it was okay for, somebody that had a blog to really tear you apart and put false statements, not just critiquing my work. But what I did is I went back in when Randall made those comments. He said certain things, and I went back in and I went to the Martin Willis's video, and I went in time to said, okay, here's where I said this. Here's where I said this. At 2 minutes and 13 seconds on the video, here's where I said this. So I had the evidence that what he was saying, I didn't say, and I had proof that I said it. So all of that, I was spending my time doing that kind of thing, defending my own professionalism when they didn't take that extra step at that point. And I even have a message from Hoffman that said, well, it was early in the SCU endeavor, and we didn't really know what we were doing, something to that nature. But, you could at least have the professional courtesy to tell somebody they're being warned, and then removed from a project that took a lot of work.
There seems to be some accountability issues here that, from my hearing of the story, have not been addressed. If we were expecting a long-standing initiative, 10 years from now, that there would still be an SCU, they would have to be working within some, functional dynamics, not dysfunction, as some of the things that I'm hearing you say sound like. Now, your survey of the qualifications for the team members at SCU, you said, I think I understood it's a mixed bag. There's not a lot of doctorates in this group.
There's, I think right now, because I recently looked up their membership, and there's only about 114 or so members.
Out of 114 total?
Yeah, 114 total. And I think 20 some of them have doctorates. Now, I don't know if all of those doctorates are from brick and mortar universities. I would guess that, in fact, I know some of them are from universities that have no attendance policies. So these could be, kind of like how MUFON does, where you can print out your own certificate. Some of these people may be those type of doctorates.
You say some of these qualifications may not pass good vetting and scrutiny. Well, one of the academics who's on as a board member is from here in BC at our Simon Fraser University. That's Dr. Paul Kingsbury, and I don't know if you've had time to look at his work or.
Yes, I have looked at just his bio and so forth. I don't know his work that well.
Well, my limited understanding is that he was the lead on a research project here in the last 5 years or so that attempted to make sense out of the beliefs of the people who feel that UFOs or extraterrestrials are real. And this was the focus of his study again was more perhaps faith oriented than on attempting to make sense out of nuts and bolts findings, pieces of objects or multi-sensor collections of readings and so on. So I thought that was kind of an interesting, arm's length position to take for someone who was a scholar, if they wanted to talk about that they would engage with it as perhaps more as a belief system than as a objective reality or a hard reality, just like an automobile or a stoplight is a hard reality.
Yeah, that's when I read a little bit about him, it was very interesting topics that he was exploring, and some that I have taken an interest in myself. But again, just the fact of being associated with SCU, it bothers me a little bit.
So you're saying that because of your experience, just your empirical measurement of what was happening at SCU, you've had to reconsider now the potential of these members to be leaders in UFO discovery or this kind of research?
And I don't know very many of them, but I was disappointed. Like at the time in like 2018, MUFON was having some difficulties, as well with their membership. And also, I was a bit disappointed at the members of SCU. They were pretty frequently making snide, malicious comments about MUFON, when, in my opinion, at least, professionals don't have to do that. Now, not everybody did it, but there were members who did, and I just felt bad that they would stoop to that.
This wasn't the kind of noble or honorable culture that you would expect in something that was more academically focused.
No, I mean, I really don't believe in kicking people while they're down, and I do commend people when they do the right thing. But I was seeing enough of the negative comments about MUFON, things like, if you say that again or screw that up again, you're going to have to join MUFON, those kind of comments. And that was just, I thought that was not becoming of a professional organization. And then, they would, I had screenshots of them. It wasn't like they were trying to hide it.
Oh. Well, and so this perhaps frat boy culture somehow what I'm hearing at least is that the work product that's coming out, there's more of this kind of culture of exceptionalism. People are posing or presenting as the knowledgeable ones, but here's a real work and real products, real output. I would say, from my limited perspective, not being a member of any of these groups, Tom DeLonge and whatnot, I'm just looking back over the last few years. It's just been incredible popular appeal in terms of making promises, but the level of delivery that I've seen compared to even just, having been someone who went out in the field and met average folks from around America who were exceptional photographers and knew enough to take their camera at the right time. Even people like yourself, you knew enough to pick up your camera at the airport when you were filming that triangle in night vision. You knew enough to do that. So as I say, that folks like this are able to make these evaluations, and I think they're delivering more just by showing up with their simple firsthand experiences than what these big groups who are promising and fundraising. But where are the tangibles? Where are the deliverables? I don't feel like I'm getting any extra good.
There's something strange going on, I think, with that organization that bothers me, as being an honest-to-goodness, above-board research organization. When I think it was when Robert Powell recently appeared on as an interview at CNN with I forget her name, but it was not that long ago. He appeared on an interview with CNN, and. Well, the interview, that reminded me that, hey, I was working on a small team, a three-man team with Robert Powell back in 2018. And Powell's interview was about the Pentagon task force. The UAP task force, the Pentagon. And I said, when he talked about that triggered that whole memory came back of working on the shapes identification team. So I said, I just wrote a post for my Facebook page, and I sent it to a couple of other UFO-related Facebook pages. I said, back in 2018, I was recruited by Robert Powell to work on this team, and this team, basically all I said is, was saying kudos to Robert Powell because this team might have been, a prototype or a precursor to the Pentagon task force. And that's basically what it was. That was just, saying that I would serve on a team like this, and this, maybe that team in 2018 was a precursor to the 2020 Pentagon team. And then he responded back on at least on one of the groups that to get things straight, that he never participated in it, that he never participated in a task force that had anything to do with government agencies. But yet in the post that he sent me, on the Facebook post to recruit me, he said that this team that he wanted me to join was modeled after the U.S. Air Force report number 14 and the book that a NASA engineer, I think it was, wrote. Now, the United States Air Force is a government entity, and so is NASA. So why would you even say that? That's confusing to me. I just can't follow that thinking.
So as you say, there's this emphasis on denying links or relatedness to government projects, or that the SCU initiatives would somehow be pollinating, government programs, that they would be doing the work at the SCU. It seems strange to me. Why would a person go out of their way to give such a denial? I mean, is there something about guilty feelings? Is there something, is there some telling? Is this some kind of a flag? Again, considering it seemed to me that in his manner of speaking to you, having surveyed some of the papers that you say that you have on file, his manner of speaking with you didn't seem contrived. It was just giving you, here's your reference point, USAF, this is how they do it, looks like this is how we do it. What's the big deal? It wasn't a big deal then. Why a big deal now?
In fact, even there, we were doing we would do the work on back and forth on email, and then we had these conference calls. Well, there was one day, and in fact, I even made a note of it. I thought it was strange because we were supposed to have a conference call on June 6th in 2018. I'm doing this from my memory right now, but I have it all documented. And out of clear blue, Robert Powell called me on June 5th of 2016, or 2018, and we just talked about he was trying to recruit me for that team, for that shape identification team. And at that time, he had mentioned that it was the United States Air Force that had, encouraged or prompted him or whatever to start this team up. So, and I just thought it was odd. Why did he call me a day early? We weren't scheduled for our call to the next day. He knew it because we set up the schedule. Why did he call me to give me some additional information that included saying that the Air Force had essentially initiated this whole project? And in fact, to the point where I later emailed somebody from MUFON to see if they could check on it. So I don't have an email from Robert Powell, but I did send an email to a member of MUFON to see could this project that I'm working on have been initiated by the U.S. Air Force.
And so that I understand, to be clear, the scientific coalition is supposed to be an independent body, a non-governmental body.
Correct.
And if I was comparing to Tom DeLonge's group, Tom DeLonge's people, many of them were openly drawn from CIA, NASA, like that. They were drawn from government. And so I'm trying to make sense of it in my head. If the SCU was a government front, but they were bad spies and they kept giving it away, would that explain Robert Powell's denial after the fact?
See, and I don't know what it is. That's what it just doesn't make sense to me. But the whole, from the get-go, it didn't make sense to me. Why would you ask somebody to post their research on a page? And I even have statements saying it's okay to post that, and then have your own colleagues in this coalition tear you down to a place where you got to threaten to sue them because what they were saying was definitely, false.
Well, as you describe it, it sounds like it was a really stifling environment. It was presented as, it was gaslighted as a free and open publishing space, but in practice, it turned out to be The fact that you posted was a serious problem. It seems just by participating, you were creating a problem.
Again, apparently Randall claimed that he didn't read the post on the Facebook page, but I don't know if he did or didn't because it was posted there, and he was a member. Okay.
And not only that, he was an active communicator on that page, as you later discovered. Is that not the case?
Yes. So I don't know when he started communicating, but he was supposed to, according to Hoffman, he didn't communicate on the Facebook page.
Well, isn't that incredible how things change so rapidly? One day a person is doing things one way, and the next day it's entirely different. It's amazing.
And it was, I'm sure the other people must have adjusted to it because I really, as a professional organization, I never worked on conditions like that. And even when I go back now and look at their page and see misspellings and, incorrect use of words, I'm thinking, man, this would never fly in a reality, of a real scientific coalition group.
Oh.
I think people, other people, maybe the other people that belong don't see those things.
Well, you raise an interesting point because we were talking about the role of believerism in driving behavior amongst the folks who care about UFO issues. And so if we are in denial and we can only uphold what we want to believe in the face of facts, that's a psychological issue. But people who are we saw an example. We've lived through, as a society, a point, a turning point in certainly in U.S. history, where with the storming of the Capitol on January 6th, the world of alternative facts gained new traction in terms of the alternative facts became operant principles. Not only are we thinking differently now, we choose to think differently or believe differently, but now we will take action on those beliefs irrespective of whatever. In that case, I understand maybe there's 500 people in court right now, many of whom may be separated from their families for a long time. And so we make these kinds of seemingly irrational choices or these adopt these extreme positions with a variety of consequences. I fear, from what I'm hearing you say, is that there are a number of extreme positions that have already been adopted in the ufology community that may be lensing or distorting our public access to clear science or clearly vetted information. In part because the public in some ways has been paying for this on their own dime. Outside of Blue Book or the Twining Report, the public has been paying for the UFO research on their own dime. So we have a lot of entrepreneurs who are in there publishing, various products that they're creating. If a person went to a conference, they know that the vendors' tables are a big part of the UFO conference.
And on that topic alone, I had a situation with MUFON that has evidence that. I was told that some of the research that I had done with both the Kecksburg case and the Roswell case, that they had never seen that level, high quality of writing and work, but that because it would cause a lot of problems with the people who make a living selling information about the Roswell case, that they wouldn't publish my book. I have again all of that, but you were talking about belief systems. There's he's an astronomer, teaches astronomy at the University of Maryland, I think it is. His name is Dr. Cole Miller. Have you ever heard of that name?
I believe this is related to visitors to our solar system.
Well, yes, it is. He has come up with levels of belief.
Okay.
And I have one of his lectures. I have a copy of his lecture on this at the university there. Because I used to live in Maryland too.
I see.
And I didn't know him when I was down there. But do you have a minute? You might find these interesting.
Tell us about these, yes.
Okay, so I ran across this. I just, I don't go to MUFON or SCU, I go to like universities and try to find evidence. After my experiences with them, call me foolish, but so he did a paper and he uses this in his class, okay? And he's a well-known astronomer, and his levels, he calls this levels of belief in UAPs, UFOs, and the burden of proof necessary. Is it okay if I go through this with you?
Burden of proof is a very important idea.
Okay. First of all, the top level. Now, this has to do in conjunction with Dr. Howard Gardner's existential intelligences, as far as I'm concerned. And he has a multiple intelligence theory, and Dr. Gardner has what he was working on back in 1999 as a potential intelligence that he called existential intelligence. And people with a strong or robust existential intelligence tend to believe in life after death and things like, is there life on other planets? Now, he still has, and I've worked on a research project and I consulted with Dr. Gardner. He's worked on Project Harvard Zero, and he's a well-known psychologist. But and I was doing I was touching base with him on an independent research project as recent as a few months ago. And I started a project back in 2013 with him. But Gardner claims if you have a very robust existential intelligence, you could be more prone to believing in UFOs and life on other planets, basically. That's kind of it in a nutshell. And other people say the same thing about an existential intelligence. But in Dr. Miller's case, he has the following categories of believers. Okay, the top one is called the true believer, and this is the phenomenon, the UFO phenomenon in question has been established beyond any possible doubt, and no further data or disproof of apparent evidence will make a difference in the true believer's mind. Okay? And then he's got the hopeful believer, and that's kind of where I put myself. And a hopeful believer is willing to accept disproof in individual cases, but still has a firm belief in the overall phenomenon of UFOs. Then there's the person that's genuinely neutral. And that person has not made up their mind yet, his or her mind yet, and thinks that arguments for or against the phenomenon are about equally strong. And then there's the persuadable skeptic. And that person thinks that no current evidence for the phenomenon is enough for belief, but if strong enough evidence is presented, they can accept it. And then there's the entrenched skeptic, that not only is current evidence inadequate, but no conceivable future evidence would be enough for belief. And Dr. Coleman Miller claims that all of us combine these approaches in different situations. And he's Dr. M. Coleman Miller, professor of astronomy at the University of Maryland at College Park.
So at certain times, we could be any one of those roles. We could fill those roles ourselves.
Under certain conditions, yes.
Well, and so this is a very interesting table or way of examining this question, so specific to the UFO field. Is it your opinion that the general population upholds a belief in extraterrestrials, and they look to the ufologists to endorse or support those beliefs?
I think at least a third of the population does, at least.
We're just waiting for the government to tell us about the aliens.
Yes, and I've been since this has all happened, I've been going around collecting what people say on the Facebook groups, the UFO-related Facebook groups. And it's just amazing how scary it is to read those.
Well, tell me, what is the fearsome part of all of this?
that they don't believe they believe UFOs. They believe in UFOs more than they believe in the government.
Are you saying that there's some sort of guilty until proven innocent perspective that people are now applying to the government on questions about captured UFOs or captured extraterrestrials?
Oh yeah, I mean there's some people that are way out there. I mean there's no evidence. There's no evidence anywhere that's hard evidence to say that UFOs are extraterrestrial in nature.
Well, this is a very interesting problem. In my blogosphere life of the last 5 or 6 years, I spent many moments hearing people talk about various treaties that have been signed between presidents and extraterrestrial races. So, but from your background, your serious academic background, you really haven't been able to find evidence of that. But would we say even further? Do you have any hope that that's even possible that we've done that?
I don't think so. But there are a colleague of mine. His name is Jay McTighe, and we used to work together in Maryland. And he does lectures and presentations on something he refers to as deep thinking.
Okay.
And a deep thinker is a person that basically can take situations from one event and, if they work, transfer them to another event, so that you have now data that becomes fresh, okay, and that you can apply to another situation. It's transferable. People who are not deep thinkers can't really do that too well. And the research I started doing, I didn't go back to finish it, but the people who would follow into like one of the top believer categories, at least my research was indicating that they were not capable of using higher order thinking skills where they could go from one situation and transfer that information to another situation.
So you transpose the lessons learned onto the new problem.
Yes. And I've been trained in something called, I can't even think of the name of it, but it's a continuous improvement process. Baldrige, have you ever heard of that?
Well, the idea of continuous improvement, I think, in business, I've been exposed to.
Yes. And I've been trained thoroughly in that through my career. And it's kind of a cycle where after you add additional information, that initial concept is changed a little bit, then you go back and you start over again. But you have to, you use this information. It's like a musician or an artist. You work on the object. Let's say you're working on a sculpture. You work on it, then you stand back and look at it, and it works on you. Then you go back and work on it, then it works on you. So you have to have this constant process, back and forth process. Some people just can't get there. I don't think they've tried, but they can't get there.
This gets us into axioms like "fool me once, fool me twice," and so we may be in a position where we're assuming right now that our general population is a "fool me twice" kind of a population. We're not strong enough. We're not strong enough to establish boundaries and draw the line on issues where we may be being exploited or abused.
Well, I mean, it's unfortunately here in the United States we're having something that's called Trumpism now. You can actually see that manifesting itself.
Well, this has been a major social movement in the last 5 years. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, that's what I'm starting to see now. When I start to see all this stuff and people saying, that they want to, like the SCU saying they want to be part of the next, they want to have input on the, releases of the next data on UFOs. Why? I mean, and, how that can, it's like they're almost asking to be paid. Some people are asking to be paid and they're asking for money, and you think that's not going to change the outcome possibly of some group's interpretation of what UFOs are? Of course it is.
Well, in terms of the for the record science that will go down in what will be taught in the schools, we would want some quality control over that, I think.
And it's not, and I'm a strong advocate of teaching what I would call anomaly, appreciation in the schools, because I've piloted programs that I've worked on with people from NASA and other like astronomy types of conferences, and it really works if you can take. I call it anomaly appreciation. But if you can start kids out early and do it correctly, it's a really good tool for educating young children.
Well, instead of this approach, what I think I understand, what we have presently in our ufology culture is we have a commercial culture.
Yes.
We have people who may or may not be having experiences, but they're creating products around these narratives. And those products are for sale, and there is substantial commerce. I mean, some of these personalities, to my understanding, are making millions of dollars because of the interest in their presentations. Whether or not these are fantastical works of fiction, it doesn't appear to be the consumer's primary interest. It appears to be more that folks who have deep felt beliefs want to shore up and fuel those beliefs with the latest trend that they may feel more supported by. But I think that beyond those emotional needs, I don't as a curmudgeon critic, I don't see a heck of a lot of other great stuff coming out of the UFO community. I will even go as far as the harbinger of critique here. As a young reader in primary school, I had such good exposure to what was available at the time because our librarians stocked many books on paranormal anomalies. I don't necessarily think that the discourse has changed. Other than I think that the practical issues related to on the videographers making contact from the ground to the sky kind of demonstrations that are more common now. When I was a child, that was not a common thing. But other than that, I don't see a lot of other things happening. I think, and that makes me in as much of as any of the other critics of this most recent report from the Pentagon, that it didn't. We could be, as even Kevin Randall wrote, we could be 50 years in the past and still be as well served.
I even have evidence in that area where I've had experience, especially that I have hard evidence that I can relate to, is exactly what's happening in that commercial, let's say even book sales, that I have documented that I can go through with shortly without too much time. If you have...
Yeah, please tell us about the publishing side. We want to hear more.
Okay. Let me see. I put it here in my notes.
Helping us keep it real here.
Yeah, this is all documented, and it's. But
I mean, nobody's calling me to ask me to publish my books about UFOs. What happened?
Well, yes, is this you won't. I didn't believe it, and it changes. That's what's odd. I have it in my notes here. I put it down for you. I thought this is okay. Here, I found it. Now, this is basically how I remember it happening. Okay, and I was living in Indiana at the time. But then on September 22nd, 2018, and I have all the screenshots and all the emails as evidence. Okay. I received a call, and I'm going to name names because I don't think there's anything illegal about that, but her name was Susan Shumsky, Shumsky. I don't know if that name sounds familiar.
It's an author, yes.
Yes, she's a best-selling, award-winning author and highly acclaimed professional speaker. I got it out of clear blue. I got a call from her, and it wasn't through SETI or anything like that, but. this writer and lecturer, Susan, recruited me to be a presenter on a UFO cruise that she was organizing. And this is the same year. This is like all happening one after the other.
Yeah.
Okay, same year, 2018. And like she sent me this cruise brochure, and there were people like Friedman was going to be there, and Jan Harzan, and all those people, top people, were going to be presenting on this cruise. And she asked me to be part of the cruise, and she said asked me if I had a book to promote during the that upcoming cruise, because I could sell it on, and that's how I could make money on the cruise. And so I told her that I had a book in progress, and that time I had at least one book in progress. I said, but I didn't have a literary agent to turn it into a book yet. So she recommended that I contact her literary agent. And his name was Jeff Herman. And I think Jeff is a pretty well-known literary agent. And I think he was out of the either Massachusetts or Boston area. So she said she gave me information to contact Jeff to see if he would take me on as a client. So, and again, this is just for a cruise, UFO cruise. So he's an exceptional veteran literary agent. He was an entrepreneur and an author. His areas of expertise included popular business, spirituality, and most areas of nonfiction. And he claimed this: if he can sell it, he'll represent it. That was his motto, essentially. So it sounded interesting, but I knew he was a very top-notch, and still is, very top-notch literary agent. So that was September. On October 2nd of 2018, I began collaborating with Jeff Herman by email. He started sharing ideas about my writing and talking about publishing a book on UFOs. And although I never signed an official contract with him, Jeff became my literary agent and helped me immensely with organizing my thoughts on a book. Okay. In fact, we went through I ended up writing several different proposals that he encouraged me to write. So the one book proposal that I started working with him on had both episodes about the 1965 Kecksburg UFO incident and the 1947 Roswell incident in it. So I sent Jeff Herman an email with my full book proposal attached to it. And after reviewing my proposal, Jeff said the following to me in writing. This happened on October 18th, 2018. So Jeff wrote, "You present the most convincing debunking of a major event I've seen, which also provides a set of random variables that could be used to explain similar events." I'm going, uh-oh. Then, October 22nd, that's just a few days later, 2018, Jeff Herman writes me, this literary agent, writes to me again, emails me again. He says, "Your title is intriguing and promises objectivity that most of the gaggle of books doesn't even pretend to have. Your logical debunking of Kecksburg and Roswell will pierce many hearts. I've often felt that much of the noise is a deliberate beard for the international military industrial complex. But you have hard evidence and motives to support your point of view." I'm thinking, wow. Then in 2019, okay, MUFON and what was known as Red Wheel Wiser started a joint publishing venture that was in conjunction with Micro Publishing Media and Jeff Herman, the literary agent's agency. That venture created an imprint known as MUFON Books. Okay? So then on January 30th of 2019, Jeff Herman wrote to me and he said in an email, "Bob, I'd like to try getting your book published as part of the MUFON Books program, which I, meaning Jeff, now producing. For political reasons, that may not be possible, in which case I'd like to try finding a home elsewhere, meaning for my books, not for me. So he goes on to say, disrupting a rigid belief system has consequences and can create schisms. Many people literally earn their livings promoting what you debunk. Many others have staked their egos and reputations verifying these sacred events. And this is why I may have trouble getting you into the MUFON program. Then on March 14th, Jeff writes me, he says, after reviewing my proposal with his new partners, from MUFON, he wrote the following. So he's reviewing my proposals with MUFON members, and now he's getting back to me. So he says, I have reviewed the proposal and chapters with my publishing partners for the MUFON Books imprint. The consensus is that you would need to exclusively focus on your alternative theory for the Roswell incident. This makes much sense, since it's the most pivotal and recognized event in UFO lore. Within the context of explaining your point of view, you would be able to discuss your overall perspective about deliberate false flags and the conspiracy of confusion and distraction, while at the same time reinforcing that something real does seem to be happening. Another issue that came up was that your writing is too academic and needs to be more stylistically suitable for mass market lay readers. And it says, what do you think? I believe that if done right, the book can be commercially successful, especially if it can help readers to see beyond Roswell for affirmation that the underlying belief in the existence of ETs, including interactions, isn't without validity on some level. So he signs it, Jeff Herman. So I revised, again, that book proposal based on Jeff Herman's suggestions and drafted a second book proposal as well. So now I've got like 3 or 4 book proposals floating around out there. So my new book in progress had a tentative title of No Time Like the Present to Reform ufology. Then on October 31st at 3:56 p.m., Jeff Herman responded to my new writings that I sent him. He says, Bob, I actually owe you 2 responses. With regret, neither book will fit the MUFON Books program. It says, basically, they're a bit dense, not meaning the books, and will only be appreciated by the central core of the UFO community. And that's not enough customers for a mass market model. And I did some research, and I found out that popular mass market novels are written at a 7th grade level. And Jeff goes on to say, frankly, they are better suited for self-publishing and can be marketed through relevant social media sites, other people blogs, and at programs. And he signed it Jeff Herman. And then I did some more research and found out that the average American adult reading level is at about a 9th grader. But popular mass market novels are written at a 7th grade level because studies show that adults prefer reading 2 grades below their ability. So readability is important to everybody who is producing content. But I will always question why Jeff Herman, who was a person functioning as just a literary agent, praised my writing, but the same person functioning as a MUFON Books partner rejected the exact same written materials. So based on that experience with the MUFON Books publishing, I think that the truth about UFOs whatever that might be, will never be disclosed to the public as long as ufology nonprofit organizations have the ability to manipulate the data about the UAP UFO phenomenon.
Well, it almost appears that there's this coddling culture that's being enforced here in terms of access to publishing resources. If you want to be a MUFON books author, you better coddle the belief systems that they've woven over the many decades. If you're doing anything that's going to tear up the fabric, they don't want anyone tearing up the rug. They're not looking for that. And this from as you help me to remember, and you keep reminding me, MUFON's mission statement includes the word science in it. So,
in fact, its mission is the scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity.
So we're reaching this conclusion that science is hard, so we better not do science. That's what I'm hearing is going on.
Yeah, well, plus the real truth about UFOs, even if it was the truth and it's out there, it's never going to fly. Nobody's going to buy it, according to MUFON. And they're not going to sell it.
And this is predicated on disbelief in the government and the culture of creating these celebrities who will believe above everything else. Travis Walton was called to task recently, a story that came out that you had noted about one of his witnesses undermining the integrity of his entire claim. But Travis Walton is a beloved public folk hero. Yep. And so, we don't like our government, but we love our folk heroes. This is sort of, we love our Ashley Babbitts, our martyrs, you see. We love our martyrs who will go to the Capitol building and take a bullet. This is what I'm feeling when I'm listening to you talk about where our society is going, the current trends in society, and how this will reflect in our ufological endeavors.
Yeah, I did several presentations, lectures with Travis Walton in Texas and other areas, and people. There was a statement that his own brother admitted that event never happened, and and it was all types of. And I forget one time he was presenting a lecture and he played the movie I forget what happened. I think he played the movie what was it, The Fire in the Sky?
Fire in the Sky. Yeah.
And then he came out and did a lecture. But in one of the lectures, what caught my attention was that this advanced technology UFO came down, and abducted him, and then they examined him apparently, but they had the same equipment that they had in the current hospitals rather than the equipment they would have had in hospitals in the future.
From the future, right?
Yeah, so I sort of thought, there's something that doesn't play right here. And I never said anything to him, but this is, and I kind of doubt if anybody else has these kind of bits of evidence showing that people that are, literary agents working for MUFON are actually telling people, hey, you write to scientifically for MUFON members to buy this.
MUFON Books published Craig Campobasso's most recent title, and I interviewed Craig maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and my understanding he's very invested in extraterrestrials in our solar system, overseeing us like a council and that kind of thing happening, overseeing our governance, and this is very a deep investment he has in those ideas, and they ran with that. They published that, no problem. So this is the kind of research we're going to have moving forwards. MUFON being one of the largest and most visible portals or brands in this area right now. Maybe some up and comers going to come and do a wholly different editorial for us with huge financial backing, but that hasn't happened. Mostly, it seems like my summary, my overly generalized summary about the groups that take on the U.S. government on these kind of secrecy issues is they all come to the stone wall and they all hang out there, and that's as far as they all get. Again, I say Tom DeLonge, SCU. I mean, I'm not an insider, so I don't know all the secret research. But in terms of deliverables to the public, I mean, it was the public they were appealing to for funding. Well, where's all our deliverables? I'm just not getting it. I'm not a fan. I'm just not a fan of big promises and under delivering. I like the folks who silently do their duty and slip in and out without us noticing them and get the results.
That's my opinion today. Is nonprofit organizations or whatever that are advocating studying UAP UFO phenomenon, that they're not worth the time. I mean, there's real things to study. There's really a lot of research that can be done out there. And today, knowing, like, for example, in the Drake equation, that there's a possibility of 40 billion Earth-like planets circling around sun-like stars in just our galaxy alone. Okay, so I think the statistics are there that eventually, if that, just statistically, there ought to be extraterrestrial life out there. It may not look like us or anything, but it ought to be out there somehow.
The Drake equation fuels the hopeful belief.
For now, I think it does. Yeah, at least statistically, you have to keep in mind that there could be one day an object that comes from another solar system and that was designed by intelligent beings. But it could take millions of years to get here.
Well, but in the abstract, these are possibilities.
Yes.
These are real possibilities. We must be prepared for all possibilities. Life will be serving us up the unexpected. I guarantee it. This phase that we've gone through, though, I think it was an important phase as a society for us to pass through in terms of our promises and deliverables, the Pentagon particularly, this particular report, because now I think the pattern has been established. For those of us in our lifetime who are looking for some kind of findings or disclosure, we may be satisfied that this is the slow trickle path. This is not the direct. This is not the Zen route to UFO enlightenment, waiting for the government to do their thing. There's stuff. I assume there's stuff going on in government every day, 24 hours a day. I don't know the minutiae or the details of most of it. I was hopeful, like everybody else. I fantasize, and I'm a kind of a naive child when it comes to things like UFOs and stuff. I'm hopeful, but this wasn't it. And I think as far as I'm concerned, I'm closing the book because of I think fundamentally because of national security issues that inherently will prohibit the kind of disclosure that we might hope for. I think, in my opinion, as of today, the national security issues are too profound for any of these, for what I've seen of these UFO groups to tackle or to succeed in their negotiations with the government for any kind of disclosure. It's not construed as something that's feasible.
The thing, just like you're saying, that what puzzles me, now maybe it's just me and our way of thinking or whatever, but back on June 3rd, 2021, when the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies posted on their Facebook page, okay, the post began with the statement, SCU is well positioned to become a vital partner in any UAP UFO research going forward. Now, I can't imagine the government, especially if they have, the U.S. government, if they have qualified people, accepting that offer. It's okay, you can come and work for us just because you said so. But they're probably going to be wielding the idea, okay, we're going to have, all these true believers pounding on your doorstep or coming to your doorstep until you use our data to explain, UFOs. It just, I can't imagine someone doing that.
What I'm hearing you say is as if some of these players have these preloaded biases that they are going to attempt to enforce or to compel government to embrace, in part just based on sheer numbers. They're going to say, I've got 100,000 followers or 1 million followers or something like that, and that will be, and this is what we believe about UFOs. Are you going to accommodate us or not?
Yeah, that's what I see it leading to. You have, I think, MoveOn has some 4,000 followers, and SCU has about, or at least members. And SCU has, 100 or so. But I can't see them. They're almost demanding, to be part of the ongoing research.
It's almost
I wouldn't want those guys following up my research.
Well, in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, one of the characters is an average laboring guy working for the telephone company or something like that. And becomes a contactee, and he eventually works his way up the food chain, all the way up to the special operators who go on the spaceship. Right? I mean, that's quite a personal voyage. But this whole idea about who we're gonna send out to space. This is this whole kind of classic trope or meme that's being played to right now, and I can see all these folks who had serious scientific careers, and they're looking for they want to go to space, or they want to be the first person on the sun, or whatever this UFO contact. They want to be the person. They have a deep. Come hell or high water, they want to be the person, the contact person, just like in that movie. But in the film, it's Joe Average, Joe Sixpack is the qualified candidate, at least one of them. But here, it's the jousting of who has the sharpest pointed intellect, who has the greatest scientific credentials, who published the most, who has the biggest following. Will popularity be the final deciding factor, and who has the best science? Whose Twitter following is the greatest? Will that be the scientific lead now, as far as government is concerned?
There was recently something out about women astronauts or whatever, on how some had, they were really in good physical shape and everything, but they didn't have, I think, the degree or whatever, the quality needed to go into outer space. They didn't have the degrees that they needed to function out there, or the intellect, or whatever skills or whatever. And now that they're like Spaceport America, I was working with that organization when I was in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. And almost anybody that could come up with the money could fly into space. But they still, they still hadn't built the ships that were sturdy enough to make the trip without being too dangerous.
Well, yes.
So, I had an eye and an ear for that whole situation. That almost anybody that had the money could fly, but they weren't going to do much.
This is the era that we're in now. Elon Musk.
Yes.
Jeff Bezos both have these privatized space initiatives. And I think it is Virgin, Richard Branson, who was offering, short tours in orbit, or
yes,
brief tours.
That's what I think it was called Spaceport America. They built it and everything down in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, and I visited it, and I was on part of the meetings that they had because the school districts would get some of that money. There were ways we were distributing money on that, and it got to the point where they couldn't build the ships safe enough to fly people up. They would just go up and come back down again. But they were at least going into space,
breaking through some of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
A guy like me, at the end of the day, even though I had the money, I might only be more concerned about what the in-flight movie or the meal was.
Yeah.
It's such a quick, little skip.
To get a window seat at least.
You get the window seat, you can see the people hanging out outside. Yeah. What are you doing out there? Well, so we are in this very interesting era of discovery and privatized discovery. We're trusting, at least the investors have been trusting in these risky space-related ventures, and risk and investment are natural partners in the American economy. It's always been like the riskiest things always can attract top dollar. So this UFO topic, in a way, has been exciting. It's been exciting, like cryptocurrencies for investment potential, or to draw investment dollars. Tom DeLonge's group drew millions of dollars. I can't remember the total numbers, but the crowdfunding. The crowd was excited. The public is excited. The public remains excited about this. We could say after today, we'll put this interview away, and we know tomorrow morning, belief in extraterrestrials, belief in UFOs will still be strong.
I'm noticing too, John, is that even other anomalous phenomena are getting more advanced. Have you ever heard of a field now called manasology?
No, I haven't. Tell me. What is
It's like ghost hunting, advanced degrees of ghost hunting, where you have to have a background in like history and all chemistry. It's like they really are going into the concept of ghosts, but very deeply, because there's something out there. But they don't know what it is.
Have you researched with some of these teams?
I have done research with. I only work or try to work with like people who are scientists already. And I used to do work with a group of scientists who were based out of the Indianapolis, Indiana area, and they were all degreed scientists. And they would select certain scientists, but I would go on what you would call dark tourism tours. Oh. They had all types of unique equipment that they would invent. It was like Ghostbusters, type of things. And probably every field investigation that I did, there was something unexplained that I saw or captured on film, because I was constantly doing experiments. So now this new manasology approach, they take a look at the history, they take a look at physics, everything you can imagine where you might turn up some kind of evidence of an entity. I mean, it's amazing what's out there, but NASA even says that we only know about probably less than 5% of what's really out there in the universe.
Well, even limited to the spectra of sensory data that we can collect, given all the bandwidth that's actually there, we're getting this narrow feed.
And it's amazing. Back in the 1980s, when I was doing research projects with Penn State that were classified research projects on turning analog sound into digital sound. And I was working in a sub-basement. It was called some kind of a hybrid computer, a new hybrid computer they had invented. And there was stuff going on there. For example, with the space shuttle, I wasn't working on the space shuttle project, but I knew people who were acousticians and so forth that were working on the space shuttle project, because that booster rocket was so powerful that they on the space shuttle that it would shake astronauts' bodies, their organs out of their bodies and so forth. So they had to find a way to mask that sound. So they were working on that project and other acoustics projects while I was working on the digital to analog conversion of sound projects. And even though we weren't supposed to be talking, we would talk to each other about what we were finding. And back then, this would have been like right 1980, they were discovering that some people had hearing mechanisms that were really a lot more sensitive than the average hearing mechanism. So they were actually possibly picking up signals that other people weren't. They had the evidence of it.
They had a broader spectrum of hearing than the average person.
Yes, the average human ear can hear frequencies from 20 cycles per second up to 20,000 cycles per second. But there were people who could hear above that, hear them as sounds above that. And they were testing people like in Antioch chambers and so forth. It was a pretty exciting time.
Well, no doubt. And to look at them, we wouldn't know any different. But when we start to do science, we discover these really interesting. It raises the question: why is it that there are people who are born with different kinds of sensory perception? We're not all the same.
Yeah, it's very, because experts are saying now that we don't have just 5 main senses, but there's up to 33 now. And some people are more sensitive to like magnetic fields and so forth than other people are.
Well, and certainly animals such as birds rely on magnetic fields for direction. So it could be that our primitive ancestors, and our primitive guidance, our primordial guidance is that was part of it as well, magnetism. The questions related to ley lines in Western Europe, for example. Why did people choose these different sites, and how is it that geographers are able to draw connections between these ancient sacred points? Were people responding not only intuitively, but was there ancient science that we've lost track of today? Well, it's quite possible. We're going to have to just try do our best with what we have today. Though with the great people of the past, they can inspire us. But it's what we do with how we take that inspiration and what we do with it now. Whether we're solving a UFO problem, a ghost problem, or just trying to get a society to recover and return to something that we recognize from a big pandemic.
Well, become aware. I think that's part of it. Just becoming aware what's out there.
I feel that through talking with you, and I only get to talk to you maybe once a year. I feel like I still learn so much, and not only that, I get this sense that there's so much still to learn. You've led a very rich life, and I'm very grateful and appreciative that you've taken the time to contribute your thoughts to what's happening in ufology. I know that your white papers and your regular publications are found on your website, bobwenzelgross.com. That's BOBWENZELGROSS.com. Bob, I don't think you're going to be, even though your journey has taken you through several major organizations, I don't think you're going to be ejecting from the UFO field just yet. You're going to be with us, still staying on the research, still staying on what's good in this field, and what can help us to understand the problems of the world. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we go?
I'm going to try and make it through the night.
Really?
But no, I mean, for me, this is a very exciting time. I look at it as bigger than just being a UFO phenomenon. It's an anomalous phenomenon, and I really scientifically like getting into it. I'd like to see other scientists becoming part of it, and if there are scientific groups out there, that they should develop some standards that other people can really benefit by.
And we can start applying. But Bob Wenzel Gross, I get so much out of talking to you all the time. I follow you on Facebook. It's just terrific. Such a super connection for me, someone who's had a deep interest in these subjects for decades. I hope that my audience is getting as much as I am out of these conversations, that we will meet again to talk further about the issues of the day and the concerns, your concerns as a scientist, but where we are heading in education and in these new emerging topics.
It's a very important component. My pleasure, John. I really enjoy speaking with you and sharing ideas.